Well, I'd like to officially welcome everybody to the Preparing for Success in Your Job Interview session. I think this is number 4 out of 12. So we are glad to see you all. I am Dr. Caroline Harper from the Jackie Robinson Foundation, along with our friends from Wells Fargo, who are going to do a great session today on how do you beat the odds and get that job by being successful in your job interview. So a little bit about us and who we are, the Jackie Robinson Foundation. If you see the next slide, you'll see that we started in 1973 with Rachel Robinson, and our whole goal is to educate, inspire, and challenge. We think about this work all the time, and we've been doing this for almost 50 years now, so we're very excited about the work that we've done. We do administer one of the nation's premier scholarship programs and leadership development programs, where we focus on students comprehensively. We look holistically at students, what we can do, and how do we help you, not just in the classroom, but beyond, particularly for students who are underrepresented in their campus. So with the launch of our JRF Impact platform, our online platform for students, and the opening of our museum just a few months ago, we'll continue to engage with students and communities and continue to empower students and families across the country with the ideas of the underlying legacy of our namesake, Jackie Robinson. A little bit about the success we've had in the last 50 years, $95 million in grants and programs, more than 1,800 scholars over the years, both scholars and alumni, with a 98% graduation rate. So not only are we committed, but our students are committed. They're graduating and they're coming back to actually help us. We have more than 4,300 students who are enrolled in our JRF Impact Scholars Program. So we are very much excited. If you want to learn more about us, you can scan the QR code to find out more about us and where we are, and also to find out more about the museum. And with that, I'll introduce our commentator for today, / our one person who is modifying everything for today, our moderator extraordinaire. He is a graduate of UNC Charlotte, a student athlete while he was there, and he's had over 25 years at Wells Fargo. He is the senior lead diversity and inclusion consultant there. He has been involved in the HBCU program, which is relatively new, but he's the guy who kicked that off, along with doing our work with Beyond College. He is Dewey Norwood.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Caroline Harper, can you bottle that intro? I need you as my walk up, like, everywhere. I'm seeing fire emojis, the microphone emojis in the chat, just bringing fire. Dr. Harper, certainly want to thank you for your amazing leadership, for the way you do things. It is really, really appreciated. And congratulations to the Jackie Robinson Foundation. I want to give you a minute. You also are just fresh off of some programming. I want you to humble brag a little bit more about your most recent programming there earlier this month there in New York. So Doc, can we give it back to you for a moment?
Absolutely. So we just did our mentoring and leadership conference. It is our big deal that we do with students every year, over 100 students. And as I mentioned, that our students come back. So they become alumni, so they become speakers, they become chaperones, they become panelists. All of the above. They are also our employers for some of our students. So when we talk about this program and what we do, our work really is a full circle job. So we are always excited. This conference is usually over about 6 days is what we did this time. But we had a lot of celebrities show up for our Roby Awards dinner. We had a lot of panels for students, all the things that you want to know about, particularly the things that you don't know about yet. But also opportunities to get networking with jobs and sponsors and a lot of our partners. So it's a great opportunity. Again, more than 100 students and alumni who showed up for 6 days in New York at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. It was a great time.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Dr. Harper, almost 50 years here now of our scholar classes. Did we have a range of folks that just recently graduated and folks that graduated in?
Absolutely. Everybody shows up. So this really is like a family affair. In fact, our theme this year was homecoming. So This is what this conference is for us. It is not just our current class of cohorts, but people who are graduating in the fall. It is the fall of this year, the fall of next year, and the year after, and the year after. So it's 4 years worth of students. And on top of that, then we have alumni who come back. So it is an amazing event, and it is very much like homecoming every year.
All right. Well, Dr. Harper, again, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
To the entire team. And shout out to our buddy Shantae Joseph and Michelle Martin, who managed this amazing relationship with the Jackie Robinson Foundation. And be sure to hit that QR code, because you can learn more about our friends at JRF. Hey, enough about me. This has been on the screen for a while. Very fortunate to be with Wells Fargo now for 25 years and excited And thanks, as always, to the students that reach out and connect with us via LinkedIn. We always enjoy that. Hey, we want to spotlight for a moment some of the work at an institutional level. So when you think about Wells Fargo, a couple of things I want you all to take away. $1.9 trillion in assets under management. 1 in 3 households here in the US in some way, shape, or form is going to have a banking relationship with our institution. And of course, 10% of the small businesses in the US are aligning and somehow connecting in with our institution. So we think that those are important facts and hope that gives you a little bit of sense of the size and the scope and the scale of our institution. You can certainly jump onto our Wells Fargo Stories channel to hear more about all the great things happening from a community perspective. As we jump forward here on this next slide, just want to spotlight a little bit of the work that we have been doing in support of higher education. So if you look at the numbers here, over $110 million of financial support that we have provided for scholarships and programming, supporting students just like you all that are on the lines with us here today. And then also you'll note that over $34 million of that financial support has gone specifically towards supporting HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities. So we're pretty excited about the progress that we're making in those kinds of areas as well. Hey, as we continue, we always like to spotlight a little something. Another quick QR code for you to scan. If you want to take a deeper dive, want to learn a little bit more about some of the supports that the firm has been providing specifically around HBCUs, you can click on the QR code there. That'll take you over to a news story from our Wells Fargo Stories channel to be able to learn a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit more about a special program that we have with HBCUs towards the end of today's broadcast. All right, housekeeping is done. We've given you the recording reminders around things. And again, anyone who's listening to playback, thanks so much for dialing in. A little bit about Wells Fargo, a little bit about our friends at JRF. I do want to put this disclaimer out there. This is our second installment of the month focusing on career pathways. We did the resume writing piece earlier this month, and now obviously today focusing on interviews. This is a safe space. We want you all to continue to submit questions to us. For what Tiara and for what David are going to be sharing, they need to hear from you all. We've gotten some great questions in, but continue to send more to us. Dr. Harper will actually be facilitating the Q&A portion of the broadcast later on, but keep those questions coming and know that you can submit them with confidence. We're never going to read your name out on the broadcast. We're not going to say this came from Angie, this came from Tom. We're not going to do that. But at the same time, if there's a question that's top of mind for you, you probably have another scholar or a partner or someone else that would love to get that same information as well. Hey, by the numbers, you all know this is one of my favorite portions of the broadcast. We got to shout out the schools that are represented here around things today. So for our top performers, a lot of love from the CUNY system here today. We got Baruch College in the mix. We got CUNY York also here with us as well. HU, and you know, Dr. Harper, this is your HU. This is your HU. Howard University is in our top ranks here for today. Loyola University of Chicago. Shout out to our friends in the Windy City for coming and joining and being a part today as one of our top referral sources. We also have South Carolina State in the mix, one of our great MEAC schools. We also have University of Texas at Austin, Hook 'em Horns, coming through the tape here with high numbers today. But our highest, so don't forget about Yale University. We also have scholars on joining us from Yale. But our top performer, I think this is the first, UT Arlington, to the University of Texas at Arlington, comes in first place with the most referrals today. So special thanks again to all of those that have joined. We've even got high schools on. We've got South San High School in the mix with us today. We've got, I saw one other high school on here. Where is it? It's coming to me. Name NAA Naman Forest High School as well. I think there's one other one in there. So high schoolers, shout out to you all. And feel free to represent your school in the chat. You want to show some love to your school? Go ahead and drop it into the chat if you'd like to do that. From a programming perspective, we're going there. We're going to talk about behavioral interviews. We're going to give you a sense of some of the things you all need to be thinking about relative to the questions that are coming in. Virtual versus Skype versus in person. How do you balance through those components of things right now? Engaging interviews. How do you stay engaged? How do you stay excited as you're presenting and as you're sharing information? And then what to do after the interview, whether you receive the offer or in the instance, maybe you're a runner-up this time. Don't quite make it to the top of the medal stand. What are some things that you need to be thinking about doing? When we get to the end, we'll have a quick QR code for you to scan to jump on and give us some feedback and some details and some and suggestions that you can offer from those areas. stand by. Our YouTube channel is going to be populated very, very soon with the playback of all of the sessions that we've been able to do so far this year. And don't forget to get social with us. You hear a great thought, Dr. Harper shares something great, Tiara shares something great, David shares a great comment. Go ahead and mention them in social media, and then go ahead and use those hashtags there for Wells Fargo Beyond College, and also for our friends at JRF, for the Jackie Robinson Foundation. All right, we've covered off on items here. Enough of Norwood. You can take more of Dr. Harper, but get Norwood out of here. And let's hand the reins over to David and to Tiara. We're really, really excited about the information that these amazing partners are going to be sharing. We're going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And then right after that, we're going to jump right into the content for today. David, before I give it to you, another reminder for our scholars, please utilize the QR codes that are on the screen. Go ahead and grab those now. We have a running fun game that we do. We always love to see who gets the most LinkedIn requests at the end of each broadcast. So go ahead and jump out there and let's make those connections. Tiara, David, so thankful to be working with you all today. We're going to hand the reins over to you all at this time. Dee, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dewey. Truly an honor to be here. Students, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days, busy schedules, and possibly even your spring breaks to attend today. Really appreciative of that, and really excited to be able to drop some knowledge today. As Dewey mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out via LinkedIn. Would be happy to connect. And just to give a little about myself, 7 years with Wells Fargo, been in the financial industry for 20 plus. Member of the targeted sourcing team, which is a part of global human resources, talent acquisition, and really here and excited to be here today to share the spotlight with my teammate Tiara. So Tiara, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi there. Thank you, David, and thank you, Dewey. Yes, my name is Tiara Spencer. I am also a senior talent sourcing specialist working really closely with David on our targeted sourcing team in that global talent acquisition space. While I'm only 5 months into my career with Wells, I am about 6 years into talent acquisition space. So I love this area, and I love being able to share tips like this with you all, because we definitely want to make sure that you feel empowered to go into your interviews, no matter how long ago they may have been. So speaking of that, we do have a quick poll that we're going to start with, just so we can really get an understanding of your most recent interview experiences. So we'll have the poll open up now. Okay, perfect. So go ahead and let us know, when was your last job interview? Was it in the last 30 days, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, more than a year ago, or more than 5 years ago? All right, looks like we have a good variety. A lot of people had some recent interviews, which is very good. And obviously there's no wrong answer here, because interviews shift as time goes. So we definitely want to make sure that we can give you as much relevant information as possible, just to make sure that you feel excited going into your future interviews. All right, looks like most of you all had an interview over a year ago, which is totally fine. And then we have some as recently as 30 days. And then we have some that were also 5 years ago. So that's really great. So it looks like we have a really diverse group when it comes to just the level of interview experience that you all have had. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about just the behavioral interviewing, which, if you have had recent interviews, you're likely very familiar with this topic. But it's a very common interviewing format that many organizations are leveraging. So first, what is behavioral interviewing for those who are unfamiliar? The theory itself really denotes that past performance is the best predictor of future performance. Additionally, this format uses what's referred to as probing questions that serve to assess key areas of knowledge, skills, experience, and education. Now, when participating in these interviews, participants are recommended to leverage what we refer to as the STAR method, so STAR, which is a structured storytelling way to cover the situation or task, so that's the S&T, the situation or task at hand, the actions that you took to make the situation better, and what decisions you made to resolve any issues, and then, of course, the result, which is the R. So that's where you would share the results of the actions that you took how you were able to benefit your company or your team, and then what you may have learned that will help you in the future. So if you hear some keywords, it's you, right? So it's really understanding what your impact was to the team that you were on and how you are able to communicate that. All right, so moving forward, just talking a little bit about preparing. So here are some tips on how you can prepare for these types of interviews. So first, analyze the position that you're being interviewed for. So study the job description and tie the skills that they're looking for to your relevant experiences. In addition to that, evaluate and reflect upon your background. So one best practice that I use when prepping for an interview is copying the job description along with the required and desired skills and making notes that directly align my professional experience to what the company is looking for. And that can really help you to proactively identify the unique scenarios that you may want to use in the interview, and that can potentially set you apart from other candidates. And then, of course, speaking of being proactive, now that you know what the STAR method is, try to start creating your STAR stories prior to the interview, because trying to think of scenarios on your feet can be really difficult. So preparing some key experiences ahead of time can be helpful. So just think of instances where you can highlight how you demonstrated your team working abilities, how you've taken initiative, how you've handled conflict, problem solved, or even how you failed but learned a valuable lesson. So just know you want to make sure that you have a few scenarios to choose from so you can use different stories throughout the interview. And then you also want to be specific and quantify whenever possible. So for example, saying, I helped my team increase its sales sounds nice, but saying by the end of the month, I helped to increase my team's sales by 80% compared to the month prior. That just gives a much clearer view of how significant your impact was to your team. Okay, and then of course, this should go without saying, but be honest and true to your experiences. Of course, you know your story better than anyone. And finally, practice, practice, practice. Now, while you're practicing your STAR scenarios, remember to also understand your why. So as in, why have you chosen to apply to this organization that you're interested in? And then take time to talk through your scenarios to the point where it feels conversational, but not robotic or rehearsed. Okay, so hopefully these initial preparation tips were helpful. Now I'll pass it back on to David just to talk a bit about how you can prepare by anticipating the questions.
Thank you so much, Tiara. So as you are preparing for the interview, it's really a good idea to also think about the potential questions that might be asked. As you learned, the behavioral interview is really based on the idea of your past experience predicting future performance. With that said, we've provided some samples of core competencies that might help you understand the skills that we typically look for. It's also important to note that not all positions require the same types of core skills. So it's really important that you familiarize yourself with the specific posting just to make sure that you're focusing on the right core skills. Looking at these core competencies, you could probably see that we're looking for specific skills and they are pertinent to those specific roles. Some could be very basic, such as customer service, teamwork, while other competencies might be a little bit more specific, like competencies that are focusing on specific technical skills or adaptability and flexibility. So it's really important to just look through the posting to try and identify and anticipate those potential questions that might come your way. After you've familiarized yourself with those core competencies, you could then start to begin to anticipate those types of questions that will be asked. So let's look at the qualifications that are listed here and try and decipher the types of competencies that we're targeting. So here we can see that we have a qualification that asks for 1 month of professional experience. If we move to the right here under the competency column, we could see that they're looking for that technical expertise. Going down to the second example, they're looking for the ability to take initiative and work independently. Here we can see that they're looking for the competency of initiative. So it's really about looking for keywords in the qualifications to try and anticipate that competency. Moving forward, we have the ability to work effectively in a team environment, teamwork, excellent verbal written communication, communication. And then 1+ year of customer service experience. And clearly, it's looking for customer service. So really being able to look for those keywords, identify what they might be looking for, will really help you identify the core competency, which will then help you prepare. Just to give a couple examples of how to prepare for specific questions, when we go back to technical expertise, you'd like to prepare a story based on a successful project that you've previously participated in. And that could be during an internship that you've previously had, or even work that you've had, or even a school project would work. Jumping around, thinking about an example of teamwork, we could also think about a time when you've provided support, encouragement, or assistance to one of your team members. And those would really be good examples to draw from. All right, moving along, we actually have a couple examples of actual behavioral-based questions. And now I can tell you that there are countless resources online, so you could look up via Google, YouTube, to really help you prepare for these types of questions. But here we've included just a few just to give you an idea of what to be on the lookout for. And so I could read through one. This is based on initiative. Tell me about a time that you independently implemented a new solution when others were waiting to be directed to it. One for problem solving. Tell me about a time when you were resolving what you initially thought was a simple issue, but it turned out to be much more complicated. And so the key with these types of questions are really being able to anticipate them in advance and really be able to formulate a story that can fit in and that you could plug into these specific scenarios. A good pro tip would be to have possibly 3 or 4 scenarios in your back pocket that you could really fold into any specific scenario. And here we have the ever so famous question of, tell me about yourself. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about this question. It's one of the most common questions that you'll receive during an interview. But by common, I don't want you to confuse that with being easy or to answer lightly. Interestingly enough, this question is not only asked during interviews, you might also get this question at career fairs, at possibly conferences, networking events and mixers, or even during that famous elevator ride. For those who are not familiar with the elevator pitch, the whole idea behind the elevator pitch is the idea that you just walked into an elevator and you're sharing a ride with the CEO of your dream organization. So you have from the time the elevator takes you from the lobby to the 60th floor to make a strong and lasting impression. So what do? What do you say? You need to give that 60-second commercial where you introduce yourself in a unique way, showing your KSAs. KSA stands for your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. Doing this while also focusing on your skills and experiences and being able to showcase how they would benefit the organization and how you would perfectly be the right person for this dream job. You'll also want to fold in some key personality points and key points to leave that lasting impression. The more you practice using this elevator pitch, the easier it'll be to communicate this information to anyone that ever asks. And now I'd like to pass it back over to Tiara.
All right, thank you, David. So from here, we'll just have a quick role play where David will provide an answer to the tell me about yourself question he just mentioned using the script on the next slide. All right, so I'll give it back to you, David.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so here's a quick scenario based on what we just shared. So the ever famous question was posed, tell me about yourself. And so as a scenario sample, we have a gentleman who has worked as a finance intern for the last 2 summers with Trust Bank. I've served as a secretary of the National Honor Society since 2021 and as the vice president of the Alpha Lambda Delta chapter in Minnesota since 2022. I feel that my strength in taking initiative will allow me to be successful as an associate at Wells Fargo. I have experience successfully working collaboratively with a team and working independently. I keep my manager and other stakeholders apprised of my work progress through my effective communication skills. I'm very excited to talk with you about your needs today to see what value I could bring to your organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I hope you all found that example response helpful when it comes to really having clear and relevant responses to somewhat vague questions. And of course, like David mentioned, you can leverage this in many scenarios and not just interviews. But as far as interviews go, I'm going to share some interview etiquette tips. All right. In recent years, virtual interviewing has become the primary format for organizational hiring. So here are some important tips that you want to keep in mind when preparing. You want to make sure that you speak clearly and concisely when you are responding to or responding to questions. So a tip could be, if you'd like to just hear how you sound answering questions, you could leave yourself a voicemail or record a voice memo as if you're answering a question. So like Googling a behavioral question, and then go ahead and record yourself answering that just to see how you sound and if you need to make any changes. You also want to ensure that you secure a quality space to interview where there's little to no distractions if you can help it. And then especially in a virtual space, having a stable internet connection is incredibly necessary. So to ensure that you're good to go, try to have your computer and space set up early to combat having to log in at the last minute and alleviate any potential connection issues. And then while it may be tempting to only dress your upper half in a virtual interview, we definitely recommend dressing professionally on the top and bottom, just in case you need to get up. And it can also help you to feel more confident and prepared to do a great job going into your interview. And then you also want to make sure that you have a clear background free of distractions and limited background noise. So that could be like blurring your background on Zoom and just making sure that maybe you have a noise canceling headset or something like that, just to make sure that the focus is only on you during your interview. Okay, and then during the interview, just keep in mind, especially with virtual interviews, that the interviewer will be taking notes. So try not to feel uncomfortable with the silence or feel the need to fill up the space with more words. And then once you finish answering your question, just let the interviewer ask any follow-up questions if needed. And if not, if they don't have any follow-up questions, then they'll just move the conversation forward. All right, now let's talk about being engaged during an interview. Now, while you're in the interview, you want to make sure that you're engaged with the interviewers. This is very important, especially in a virtual setting. Some things you want to remain aware of is your body language. So smiling, acknowledging that you're listening, so nodding your head, and being aware of your hands. And then also in a virtual setting, try to make eye contact with the camera and avoid looking down if you can help it. And you also want to ensure that you're engaging with everyone in the interview. And then when it comes to your communication style, just try not to be too informal, but instead try to build a good rapport with the interviewers through natural conversation. And then finally, asking questions is one of the highest indicators of engagement during an interview. So asking organic follow-up questions throughout the interview can let the interviewers know that you're interested in learning more about their specific team. And then while you do want to save some questions for the end, here are a few example questions of what you should ask, and then a few question types that you'll want to avoid. So some that you should ask are like, can you give me some examples of projects that I'd be assigned? So if there was a part of the conversation that led to the hiring manager or interviewers mentioning projects, you can kind of piggyback off of that and ask, can you give me some examples of projects that I would be assigned? And then also, of course, this is a great one. What does success look like for someone in this position? And then some of the question topics to avoid in an interview is like information that you can easily find with a quick search. Also pay, time off, benefits questions. So those are usually directed towards the recruiter because they would be the ones who have that information readily accessible for you. So you'll want to make sure you don't ask that during the interview, but with your recruiter further in the hiring process. And then, of course, you don't want to ask questions about changing their statement of work or your schedule or the salary. Okay, and then next I have some tips for post-interview questions that you can ask. So after the interview concludes, it is important to ask post-interview questions. So that gives you the chance to collect important information about the role. It also gives you the chance to highlight your key competencies as it relates to the position. And finally, it gives you the chance to determine if the role is a fit for you, because interviews should be a two-way street. So some go-to questions may include asking about the timeline of the process. So like, what are the next steps? When should I expect to hear back from the recruiter? Things like that. And then remember, people like to talk about themselves. So you can always ask something like, oh, you mentioned that you've been with the organization 10 plus years. What keeps you with the organization? This really demonstrates that you were listening to their introduction and that you're interested in their insights. And then you never want to say that you have no questions at the end of an interview, because it can inadvertently communicate that you haven't been listening or that you believe you already know everything. Okay, and then if you'd like, you can close the interview by asking a question that will help you to tie in your strengths and how they fit with the organization's needs. So for example, I gave you some information on my most recent leadership experience and ability to collaborate at all levels of the organization. What other information would be helpful? So in this case, the interviewer's response will give you the opportunity to highlight your relevant skills. Okay, now David will share some additional tips on engaging after everything is done.
Thanks again, Tiara. All wonderful tips. Thank you so much. So now that you've mastered the interview, here are a few tips to really help you ace that post-interview. First, as Tiara already mentioned, if you didn't already ask during the closing of the interview, it's really important that you ask that hiring manager when they should be hearing back for final decisions. Sometimes that hiring manager will defer you back to the recruiter, which is okay. And if that's the case, here's what you should do. So I would recommend the day after the interview, feel free to send a quick email or even a handwritten note to the hiring manager, thanking them for their time and the opportunity to learn more about the role, the organization, etc. Don't use this as a second opportunity to interview or try to clarify some things that you thought might have fell short during the interview. This is solely a time to really be genuine and thank them for the opportunity. You can, however, reconfirm your continued interest and excitement for the role, and then you should follow up with the recruiter regarding the next steps. If the hiring manager referred you back over to the recruiter regarding those next steps, it is appropriate to reach out to the recruiter the day after the interview and also thank them for the opportunity and ask for a timeline of when you should hear back. Once you know how the communication timeline will work, please respect it. I know it's hard. I know you're excited, but if that timeline does pass and you haven't heard of anything from the recruiter, I'd wait an additional day to reach out and then just reconfirm your interest and excitement in the role with the recruiter so that it doesn't sound overbearing or pushy. You simply want to give them that nudge to get information, not come across in any type of negative way. Additionally, in the event that you do not secure the role, please try your best not to get discouraged. The job market is extremely competitive, and while you know all the things that you've done to prepare yourself for the role, you don't know what the other candidates have also done to prepare themselves. It's perfectly normal to feel sad or disappointed. Those feelings are absolutely valid. One thing that I personally believe in is that every no gets you that much closer to a yes. I use this in many scenarios, whether it's interviewing, whether it's sales, etc. I really stand behind that because it really helps motivate me. And I know it might sound cliche and cheesy, but it's my truth. Oftentimes those no's are also extremely important because they come with periods of self-reflection where you could think about what you might have been able to do differently or how you could have prepared differently, and hopefully it'll serve as a motivator. I will say at Wells Fargo, we always believe in second chances, and I've actually lost count of the amount of candidates that we've hired that didn't get accepted the first time around, but the second time around they were successful. So please, if I could emphasize, I can't emphasize it enough that it's just important to not get discouraged. Try and take what you can from that experience and try and grow from it. And this will certainly set you up for success. Moving on, as we're finishing up the skill builder today, I also wanted to share some quick to-dos, some quick do's and don'ts around the interviewing etiquette. So here we have a quick list, some common do's that we do recommend. Know the time and location of your interview and arrive on time. On time means around 15 minutes early. Sometimes if you're too early, it might throw off the interviewer and it might not be convenient for them. So you want to get there around that 15-minute mark just to make sure you have enough time to check in, be settled, and be ready for the interview. You also want to practice those behavioral stories using real life examples. And this goes into what Tiara mentioned earlier, that practice, practice, practice. Definitely dress appropriately. I always recommend conservative professional attire, especially if you don't know the specific company culture. It's always good to be overdressed and underdressed. You're also going to want to listen carefully to each answer and each question, just to make sure that you're fully understanding what's being asked. One other area of opportunity that we strongly recommend is practicing concise answers. When a question is asked, the recruiter has a limited time frame to really have that interview. So being able to answer those questions in a concise manner is truly a skill to have. Other common do's that we recommend, obviously treating others with courtesy and respect. And that goes for everyone you encounter, from the car all the way into the office building. You never know who you could really cross paths with. So it's really important that you're on your best behavior. And then you also want to come with, as Tiara mentioned, with some well thought out questions. Having that long lasting, thought provoking question can really separate you from the others, especially when the competencies, when your skills are at the same level with everyone else. Having that thought provoking question and leaving that lasting impression might get you that call back that you're looking for. Conversely, looking at a couple of the don'ts. Please don't forget the location or the time of your interview. It's definitely not a good first impression to show up late or even admit that you were lost. You also don't want to be late or rushed because it's nerve-wracking as it is to be on the interview, to interview. So you want to give yourself enough time to really be composed and really be ready to just answer those questions about yourself. Oftentimes, we always recommend, if it is an in-person interview, possibly going the night before, the day before, just doing a dry run, just to make sure that you know exactly where you need to be so that you can be there on time. Again, don't forget to practice those behavioral-based stories and limit the rambling if possible. And again, don't forget to treat others with respect. Don't forget to prepare those well thought out questions, and when possible, use and repeat the name of the interviewer. This will help build that rapport and show that you're really building a relationship, and that can, again, leave that long lasting impression. Okay, so now that you're the interview expert, it's really important to practice these skills regularly. They don't call them interview skills for a reason. It's a skill that needs to be nurtured, and the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll be during the actual interview. A few ways that you could continue practicing are listed above. We definitely recommend asking peers or even your current managers to really help organize mock interview sessions. As I mentioned earlier, Google behavioral-based interview questions, and there are countless resources that you can really use that give you sample questions that you could incorporate your own personal story with those. You also want to take turns interviewing with partners to receive constructive feedback, and you want to help others learn and grow. By helping others, it really builds that acumen of knowledge, and it'll really be a two-way street to help you and your partners grow. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Mr. Norwood. And Dewey, the floor is yours.
All right, David, Tiara, great information. I took down some mental notes. I heard the discussions around compensation, how that needs to be addressed. I also really appreciate what you all mentioned around the follow-up. And, 2 minutes after the interview, boom, don't just send a note. maybe give it a little bit of a window of time. And I'm also a big fan of the handwritten notes. Who doesn't love getting a handwritten note, whether it's mom or dad or grandmom or a colleague? Those always come in interesting ways. So, hey, as a reminder, scholars, the Q&A box is open. It is in the very, very capable hands of Dr. Harper. So, Dr. Harper, I want to bring you back on. Wow, a ton of information there. And I know that we've had some questions that have been coming in. So I want to turn the reins over to you for the next portion of today's broadcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Caroline Harper, take it away.
Well, thank you. We've already got two really good questions that have come up in the chat. The first one is the dreaded question. When someone says, tell me more about yourself, is it okay to start with the major or like just general professional interests?
Here, I'll jump in. I'll say absolutely. It's really important. That's very telling. The major that you are currently pursuing is really telling about what your interests are. So if you want to lead off with that, absolutely. I don't see anything wrong with it. Tiara?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And the key word is relevant, right? So just make sure the information that you're sharing is relevant to the position that you are applying for.
Thanks for that. This question comes up a lot, actually, on campuses in particular. I used to be in the classroom, so I used to deal with this one all the time, but I will pose this question to you two. And it's when you are interviewing with someone, whether it's a panel or it's one-on-one, do you call them by their first name, or do you call them Mr. and Miss, or do you just say their last name? How does that really work? What's the preference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it depends on how they introduce themselves. I usually try to follow suit based off how the interviewer introduces themselves. So if they say, hi, I'm Ben, then it's like, yep. Or sometimes it can be as simple as a question as well. Like, do you mind if I call you Ben? Or would you prefer I be a little more formal? And a lot of the times they'll just let you know.
Yeah, similarly, I typically introduce myself by my given name. And so no need for that level of formalness.
Fantastic. And it does depend on where you're at, right?
Yes.
So just remember, it's an interview. They are not your friends. You are trying to get a job. So just remember that. Another question that came up in the chat, if you don't get an offer or you don't get a second interview, how long should you wait before you reapply? So let's say it's a position that comes up later on. What then should you do?
No, that's a great question. And Tara, I'll jump on this one. So I will say you be aware that some organizations have specific timeframes embedded into their processes. For example, Wells Fargo has a 6-month rule that you can't apply for the same role prior to those 6 months. So just be aware of those. And I really feel that 6 months is a really good timeline to potentially have that time of self-reflection and possibly build on any opportunities that you might have. There are some instances where that might not be the case, those 6 months. So just be aware if the organization has any of those in place, and just think about the time that it possibly takes for you to potentially grow into that new role.
Great, thank you. Earlier, both of you mentioned mock interviews, and those happen in different spaces. Sometimes they happen at the campus career center. Sometimes it happens with friends. Sometimes it happens in a class, and sometimes it'll happen at a conference where an organization might open up a booth for mock interviews. Can you give some examples of what kinds of questions would that look like, or what's a breakdown of how do you really prepare for those, or how does that really happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the examples that David provided earlier were some good options, but usually when we think about behavioral interview questions, you definitely want to think about that. Tell me about yourself question when it comes to mock interviews. Get that really good practice with being as concise as possible, but also making sure that you're including valuable information. You can also think about questions about how you may have resolved a conflict. So like conflict resolution questions can be included as well. And then your team working ability, that's always a question that's thought up of. So if you're thinking about just those general questions and not really getting role specific, those are some key areas that you can hone in on when practicing. And then I'll toss to David. Did you have any more?
No, that was great.
So we always hope to plan that you'll get there early and things are going to be fine, but life happens. So sometimes things do happen where, you're not going to be able to make the interview, or there's just no way that, while you would love to be there, you just can't. So what do you do if you need to cancel? Like, what are the steps? How often should you do it? Like, do you need to give like a day's notice, or is it okay if it's only 5 minutes notice? And who exactly should you contact? What's the process for really canceling?
That's a great question. And thank you so much for asking that. So typically I would suggest, and that's one thing that we didn't include in the tips, but really having the phone number of the recruiter handy, even on your way to the interview, is probably a really good best practice. In the event anything were to come up, communicate with the recruiter directly. Oftentimes we won't provide the actual contact information for the hiring manager, but you will most certainly have that contact info for the recruiter. So definitely be in touch with them. And that can go if something happens on the way, something happens an hour before, or even a day before. Obviously, we're talking about people's schedules that they've set aside time to conduct that interview. So as much time in advance that you can, please notify the recruiter. And we understand that life happens. And like I said, second chances are something that we certainly believe in. So within reason, we would certainly be able to accommodate. I hope that answered it.
I think it did. Tiara, did you have anything to add on?
No, David covered it.
Okay. This is a question. Let's say that you actually you nail the interview, you got the job, you got the offer, and you're still early on in your career. How do you really determine what is actually a good goal? What's realistic in terms of this actual new job? And how do you really measure success in the workplace?
That's a great question. So that's a great question that could also be asked at the end of an interview to the managers or the hiring team directly. It's like, what does success look like in this space? It's really a great indicator of one, understanding how the team structure is, as well as really seeing how the manager is as a leader when it comes to setting those goals. As far as when you said ranges, were you meaning salary?
No, just like what's realistic in terms of like a goal on what it is that you're supposed to accomplish while you're there, or within a week or a month, or the time frame. How achievable are the goals, and is it realistic what those expectations are for the position that you've been offered?
Gotcha. Absolutely. And then especially if you're new to a certain space, especially if you're coming right out of school, don't expect to know everything off the beginning. Nobody expects you to. A lot of people, we expect you to learn on the job, but also just be prepared to dive in, get connected with your teammates. That's the first 30 days. You really want to spend that time connecting with your teammates. Learning what everybody does is really helpful for you, especially if you want to get into future projects or things like that. Just really getting an understanding of what the position is that you're in. So the goals that you can set for yourself is to really get to know this team, get a good grasp on your statement of work, but then also give yourself some grace too, because recognize that you're not going to know everything in the first few days.
Tiara, can you repeat that? Give yourself some what?
Some grace.
Absolutely. That's really great advice. Really allow yourself, it's a vulnerable spot to not know everything, but allow yourself that opportunity to learn and grow. And I think your peers will respect you for it as well. Great call out.
And you both mentioned a great piece that you're not expected to know everything. And the other place where it's really good to ask these questions is the onboarding process. They're not going to just throw you in the pool. There's a whole process once you start a position. So they're going to get you comfortable and familiar, and they're going to let you know. So any of those kinds of questions, when they ask you if you have any questions, that's also a great time to ask them. So thank you guys for mentioning that as well, that you're not going to get thrown in. There is actually a lifeline for you once you start.
Yeah.
Another question is not just, tell us about yourself, but the other question that almost always get asked, what are some of your strengths? How do you answer that? And that's a really hard one for some students. So what's a good practice for answering that question?
It is a challenging question, because you have to be able to answer it in a way that doesn't come across too arrogant, possibly. But I think part of this whole process of going through the interview process does require some soul searching and knowing who you are. And I think we all have a pretty good idea of the things that we excel at, and even the things that we probably have an opportunity to grow. So I think if honesty is always the best policy, clearly, and really coming from the heart and knowing what your strengths are and being able to articulate them in a way that and in a way that will benefit the organization. Not so much showboating, but this is my strength. I'm an excellent communicator, and I feel that it will really help the organization X. So really being able to tailor it so that it benefits the organization or the role that you're applying for is a really good way to handle that strength. Tiara, anything to add on to that one?
Yeah, just piggybacking. I know a while ago when I was interviewing back in the day, one of the best practices was to like use a weakness and try to make it your strength, you know. And it was we're hip to it now, guys. The recruiters know, we know. So just like David said, tailor your strength to something that is unique to you. Like if you have that communication style as a strength, be able to back that up as, you know, how you're able to guide your team to success and things like that. So just know the perfectionist doesn't cut it anymore. I'm sorry.
And that actually answers one of the other questions that someone posed, which was, you know, how do you answer that question of, you know, tell us about what you're bringing to the company? That's a great way to actually really let people know that, and then still have room for other strengths as well. So you can really fully talk about what you bring to the table. Mm-hmm. We talked earlier about don't come in with 0 questions, but come in with at least some. So what's the ideal number of questions that you should have for the end of the interview?
Mm-hmm. I always say between 2 and 3. I think if more happen organically, then that's fine. But also keep in mind just time. You definitely don't want to take up too much of the interviewing team's time, because that could potentially roll over into another interview. So you want to make sure that you're just mindful of that. But I usually say come prepared with at least 2 or 3, and just but also let it happen organically. David, did you have anything?
No, great advice. I agree.
So one of the questions in the effort to, you know, just get through there and say as much as you can and be concise, but also not skip over the good stuff. One of the questions really is about, you know, when you have interviews that tend to go over, how do you really focus on just being concise and narrowing it down to where you're hitting the high points and what they really need to know about you? And my rule of thumb has always been, I've always heard people say, don't restate what's in your resume because they've already seen it. So what would you give in terms of advice about how do you avoid always kind of going beyond the time frame?
Yeah, no, it's a great call out. And I will share that typically we like to give ourselves some cushion time where unfortunately it might bleed into that Q&A session. But to keep your answers concise, you know, one thing that we didn't really go too much in detail was following that STAR method or that SBO method. Having your scenarios really locked in and knowing your story will prevent you from rambling. And rambling is typically the main culprit of that interview going extra. So if you could keep your answers in a concise way that really conveys exactly what you want, the better. And that really comes from practice and really knowing your story.
Yep, I totally agree. And then if you're not sure, if you know that you have a tendency to ramble on, take that tip as far as like maybe not necessarily recording yourself, but timing yourself. So starting your answer and then just do a timer just to see how long that took, just to really help you understand how long your answers are going, and then identify where you can maybe take things out just to make it a bit more concise.
Those are great tips. So the other question, another one that we have is, we talked at some point in time about, you know, what's the appropriate follow-up time? And we talked about 6 months being like a really good time if, you know, you didn't get a role or they were, you know, maybe they're on the fence about something, but you want to reapply. Are there instances where maybe there's an exception to the rule, or should that really be something that you just kind of stand back from and say, okay, listen, this has already happened. Not really sure if they're going to make an exception or not. Maybe I should just go with the standard just to be safe. Are there exceptions where, you know, 6 months isn't really the rule of thumb?
T, do you mind if I start on this one?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, I think that's a really great question. And that's not to say that sometimes we're not selected, and it doesn't mean that we weren't a fit. It doesn't mean that we were a bad candidate. It just means that they selected someone else for another opportunity. And typically the recruiter will be the one to be able to communicate that information to you, especially if you were a strong silver medalist, that they might say, you know what, this wasn't the right opportunity for you, but I'm going to keep you in my pipeline. So just know that I will be using you, or I will be reaching out in the next X. They'll give you a time frame. And sometimes we don't anticipate, or we don't know when our next opportunity will be. So we'll just try and keep you in that pipeline so that when the opportunity does come, we'll tap you on the shoulder. So while we like to give that 6-month period as an opportunity for that growth to happen, there's also a lot of situations where you might be ready. It just wasn't the right opportunity. And we're all for you having that next opportunity to seal the deal. Tiara, if you want to piggyback on anything there.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah. So if there's a completely like a different role that you feel like you might be ready for, if you are interested in it, you can definitely go for it and just continue to, if you can, build that relationship with that recruiter from the other position, like David mentioned, because they might still identify something for you. So I think it really just depends on the timing, and if you feel ready for a different role, then you can definitely go for it.
David, you mentioned, this idea of really you might have been a really strong second, right? Maybe it was a position, and maybe sometimes, people opt not to fill a position and they may just rerun the position again. And it'll specifically say in there that, this is, if you were an applicant before, you don't need to reapply. And you talked about those kinds of situations where, there may be an exception or may not, but also that, if you're a strong second, there's somebody who's probably pulling for you and telling you about other opportunities. The other question really goes on to that. Like, what happens if you have a really positive rapport with, say, the recruiter, or even people who are on the panel that were interviewing you? Is it okay to reach out on LinkedIn? And if it is okay, how long should you wait to do that?
No, that's great. And I'd say, the more rapport you could build with your recruiter, the better. There's some candidates that I've hired over the years as tellers that have progressed in their careers to managers, executives, etc. And we've always stayed in touch. And it's really that communication that might separate you from the rest of the pack, having that communication, taking the initiative to connect with that recruiter on LinkedIn. Sometimes those are really key features outside of the process that help you really get that competitive advantage. So I would strongly recommend it. Keep in touch, stay in touch. And sometimes I can only work as hard as you're willing to work with me. And it's a two-way street. It really takes a lot of effort on both parties to be able to get you to that finish line. So I'd say certainly communicate, keep in touch with the recruiting team, with the hiring team, and I think that's all I got, Tiara.
No, you said it all.
I remember a colleague was telling me that they get several requests on LinkedIn. The most important thing that if you're going to follow up and send a request with someone on LinkedIn is to include a note and let them know either that you are very interested in the position or that you're very happy to meet with them or you had a really great, conversation with them. So let people know how and when and why they actually know you in that request that you're putting in there. But in the event that it maybe say didn't work out as well, how do you follow up with, say, an interviewer or a panelist or a recruiter when they haven't been responding to any follow-ups? What's the best way to do that respectfully?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of going back into what David mentioned today, you definitely don't want to bombard the recruiter with messages and update requests. But I would say, of course, you have that initial follow-up that would happen maybe the day after the interview, just to, say, thank you for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward and all that, to kind of reiterate your excitement, and then also understand the timeline. And then based off of that timeline that they provide, if it's 2 weeks, you want to make sure that you reach out to them after that 2 weeks has passed and you haven't heard anything. So that's just a really great way to make sure that you aren't overwhelming the recruiters, because they do work with lots of candidates a lot of the time. But just because you don't hear anything doesn't necessarily mean that you're not being catered to in some way. So it is okay to reach back out to them after that timeline has passed, just to check, and then use that opportunity to kind of reconfirm the fact that you are really excited about this opportunity, and they should be able to respond to you from there.
And just to piggyback on that, sometimes the process takes additional time for different factors. It could be that the recruiter's waiting on the decision from the hiring manager. It could be that a potential interviewee had to reschedule, which pushed the timeline back a little bit. So sometimes there's some outside factors where the recruiter might not honestly have an answer to provide. And while I'd love to say that every recruiter would respond to those requests in a timely manner, sometimes workloads and capacity doesn't really allow for all of those updates. So just trust the process and keep it respectful, keep it professional, especially if you feel that you're not receiving that same level of professionalism. That might be an area where that person is an area of opportunity for them. So I'd say keep it professional on your side and let the process work out.
Okay. Well, earlier you all mentioned this follow-up questions that happen at the end of the interview, and you said really about the sweet spot is about 2 to 3 questions that you should ask. Are there like essential questions that kind of everybody should be prepared to ask for those follow-up questions?
Yeah, I think one question can probably be the more general kind of what does success look like in this position? But then I think the other 2 could be more specific to something that you're interested in. So for me, I would like to know what's the culture like on this team? How diverse is this space? So really just try to understand what is important to you when it comes to the teams that you plan on working on, and try to answer or ask questions around that, but that aren't too intrusive or overbearing in a way. So really just understand what you value on the teams that you want to be on, and then just ask questions that align to that. But then also, if you wanted to ask about next steps, what happens from here, that's totally fine. But if there's something that you are interested in knowing, like, maybe a leadership style, how would you define your leadership style? That's something that I am always interested in as well. So just think about the things that are important to you, as well as the general questions.
Thank you. One of the questions is a question that doesn't come up as often, but it is important for people to know. And that's about company values and culture. And what are the values that employers would like to see in a candidate? When would it be appropriate to ask that kind of question?
So similar to what Tiara said, those are great questions to end the interview, to close the interview with. And I personally have a soft spot for those types of questions, because it really shows that the candidate has put themselves in the shoes of potentially working for our organization, and they've thought about, okay, if I work for this organization, how would I fit into that culture? And I think one of the first steps is asking the question, what's the culture like? And I know you can do back research where you could look at wellsfargo.com, you could talk to current employees, but really asking that question really serves as a way to really manifest yourself into that role. And I really appreciate those questions.
Our next question really talks about, we talked a little bit about, talking about your strengths in ways that really don't seem arrogant, right? Because there's a big difference between arrogance and confidence. They're 2 different things. What's an example of how you could change that to a positive? So let's say there's something about not just your strengths, but your weaknesses. Like what is a good way to really talk about something that, and I believe Tiara, you mentioned earlier, like talk about your failures in a way that become positive. What are some examples or an example of how you could do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I like to, or a tip that I like to give people, especially when they know that they might be interviewing at some point, is have a living document, number one, of kind of your star moments. And that could also include a scenario where you learned a huge lesson through failure. So when it comes to making a spin on that, it really, the expectation is that you put forward how you learn from that failure. So maybe a project didn't work out the way that you wanted to. Maybe you worked with a group and the assignment didn't go the way that you wanted to. But if you're able to effectively communicate the steps that you took to learn and to impact your future teams based off of the lessons that you learned, that could be a positive spin on something that may have been negative at that time. And just note that in real time, so that way you can keep that in mind for future interviewing opportunities.
So as we talked a little bit about culture and values, and we know that Wells Fargo has a wealth of mentors available across the board, particularly for younger, new employees who are earlier in their career, but also at the mid-career level as well. How do you find mentors or really kind of create a network of mentors where you really can call on them at different points of time? And if and we know there are also affinity groups at Wells Fargo. There are tons of affinity groups at Wells Fargo. How do you find a mentor who really does fit in a space that you feel comfortable with, but also as you're talking about navigating identity in that space, someone who shares the same identity? How do you find a mentor in that space?
Yeah, Doctor, I think you made a really great point with the affinity groups. At Wells Fargo, we refer to them as employee resource networks. And that is a really good way to network with people from a variety of different lines of business. And there's different types of events that they put on, whether they're networking events or skill builders, where you really just have access to a variety of career levels that you wouldn't necessarily have access to. And it gives you that opportunity to connect with them. And I would love to say most mentorships, starting organically are fantastic, but we also have mentorship programs that we actually create. Our team has a sophomore mentorship program that we offer for sophomores attending HBCUs as well as Hispanic serving institutions, where we are able to pair you up with different professionals to give you that access. But really looking and networking is really key to finding a true mentor outside of a quote unquote mentorship program. Additionally, I think that being able to put yourself out there is key. When I was younger in my career, I would go to these networking events and I wouldn't talk to anyone. I just thought that being there was enough. And sooner than later, I realized that no, it wasn't enough. You actually have to put yourself out there. You have to be comfortable engaging and talking to others and introducing and really perfecting that elevator pitch. And that's one way to really build that board of directors that is going to be there to support you. Tiara, I know you have a lot of great experience as well. Please.
Yeah, I was going to also add, don't underestimate the power of LinkedIn. Even as an internal employee, that's definitely a great way that you can search, for employees within Wells that may have the same major as you or went to the same school as you or something like that. So you can really search individuals based off of some of the key qualities that you have, and you can reach out to them. It can be as simple as connecting. We both work for Wells, or I'm very interested in the organization. I see you've done this, and this, and I would love to just have a quick informational interview with you if you have time. Worst case scenario, they say no, and you're fine. So just know that there are still those are other opportunities as well when it comes to just identifying potential mentors.
Thank you for that. One of the things that we didn't talk about, we talked about follow-up questions at the end of the interview, but you've got the questions done, you're feeling good, it's time to now go. What do you say? I mean, is it okay to say, thanks, I can't wait to hear from you soon? Is it have a nice day? Like, what's really the preferred closing at the end of an interview?
Yeah, saying thank you is definitely a great thing, especially in the interviewer space. They're very usually really gracious and grateful to hear that. A lot of work goes into putting these interviews together and sourcing you. And obviously, you were selected for a reason. So usually at the end, you can definitely say thank you so much for your time, or you can even, if you wanted to use that as your kind of exiting pitch, just to finalize, like, I'm really excited to be considered for this opportunity. I look forward to connecting with you later. Or that could be an opportunity to just ask if we can connect on LinkedIn or anything like that. So, but starting with thank you is usually the best route.
And reconfirm your interest,
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity to interview. And you could even be bold and say, you know, I really feel that I'd be a great fit, or I can't wait to see myself in this role. Something bold. Again, you're trying to leave that lasting impression, and you're towing the line that you don't want to be too overbearing, but still, you know, confident.
That makes sense. What about for recorded interviews? Like, what are the general rules of thumb for, you know, you're not in person, it's still, let's say, in a virtual capacity. Are there any tips for how do you handle a recorded video interview?
I think it's still the same. Just act as if you are speaking to someone, make that eye contact with the camera while you're not necessarily engaging with an individual person. Just understand that a person will be watching it. So just make sure that you conduct yourself accordingly in that manner. David?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you for that. I was just going to say prepare. Definitely be prepared. Smile. Personally, smiling goes a long way. And I even smile during phone interviews. I really feel that it comes across through the phone line, that smile really builds up your confidence internally. The brain doesn't realize when we're fake smiling and really smiling. So by smiling, you're really giving off that positive energy that you want. And practice is really the key.
Thank you for that. So there's a question, as we talked about, you know, when you see a job description and you kind of really want to make sure that you're intentional about how you write your resume to kind of fit with the job description, and you really are fitting your skill set with that. And we're also now talking about AI a lot, right? And so is it true that there are, you know, programs that basically when you apply for a job, they just kind of go through and scan for certain keywords, and that's whether or not you get an interview or not? Is there any truth to that?
Great question. Yes, that technology certainly does exist. I can say that at Wells Fargo, we do not use that technology. We have real live people actually reviewing resumes. And that question also brought up a good point about the tailor-made resume. Strongly encourage you all to not have a one-size-fits-all resume. You could use that one-size-fits-all as your template, but as you're applying to specific positions, internships, what have you, please tailor them to that specific role. And by tailor, we mean looking at the actual role, the responsibilities, the qualifications, desired skills, and trying to incorporate as much of that information from the actual posting into your resume as applicable. We don't want you to fabricate or embellish, but at the same time, if it applies, put it in your resume, because you have to appreciate that at the other end of that screen, a recruiter, a live actual human being, is actually looking for key qualifications to see how competitive of a candidate you are. Tiara?
Yeah, I didn't want to go too but deep down the rabbit hole of resume, because I know our wonderful team did a webinar on that earlier this month. But yes, absolutely. You definitely want to tailor that resume to the position. And then when it comes to interviewing, really just continue to build off of that, be able to tie your skills to the desired skills that are listed in the job description.
So it definitely sounds like be authentic. Whether
Absolutely.
it is in person or it's recorded, be authentic. One of the rules I remember someone telling me, and I remember as I interview students for positions, we can tell when you're reading. If it's a video interview and you are literally reading off the screen, we can tell. And that is not something you want to do. And this is why, going back to your suggestions, practice your interview skills, right? So we know that you're talking to a person, and we want to hear from you as a person as well. So it is a two-way street, as you both have already mentioned. We talked about those communications and building your network with both the recruiter and your panelists. Is it okay just to send a follow-up thank you letter or an email on the same day that the interview happens? Or is that something like when you reapply, there's kind of a certain amount of time that you should wait?
I don't think there's an issue with sending a follow-up the same day. I think that's totally fine. It is kind of a nice little just exclamation point at the end of the day. As recruiters, we love seeing it, and I think that's fine. Sometimes, you know, there is that thought process of doing it a day later or a week later or however, but it's really just whatever you feel comfortable with. But I definitely think it's okay to do it the same day.
Just piggybacking on that, I love that response, Tiara. Just go with what you feel is right and appropriate. In this space, there's a lot of different schools of thought because there are actual human beings on the receiving end as recruiters. So just go with what you feel is appropriate and run with it. And I think that's the best bet for you.
Now, this is a question specifically to Wells Fargo. One, how often are jobs updated on the website, and are there remote jobs that are currently available for Wells Fargo?
Great question. We have roles updated on a daily basis. We have, countless roles that are updated on a daily basis. Some roles get posted. Typically, our posting guidelines dictate that a role must be posted internally for at minimum 5 days or until they've reached 40 applicants, or whichever comes first. So what that means is sometimes positions can come down earlier than those 5 days, especially those more popular positions where we could get inundated and have hundreds of applicants in the first 24, 48 hours. So to answer the question in short, yes, positions are updated on a regular basis, a daily basis. And as far as our return to work strategy, return to office strategy rather, we are moving towards a hybrid model where we're looking for at minimum 3 days from the office, 2 days work from home. And that's not necessarily for all roles. It's only those roles that would offer that remote capability. So it would really depend on the specific role. But as a general statement, that's the direction that we're headed, is the hybrid model for roles that do offer remote work.
Okay, and I believe it's the last question, but you all talked earlier about doing research in advance. So before you actually get to your interview, you'll check out what are kind of the job descriptions, salary, culture, all those kinds of things, do some background research. But in the event that it's not readily available, when should you ask about salary?
So usually your recruiter, once you're further in the hiring process, the recruiter will be able to give you salary information. You don't want to ask it in the interview. That's the key point that we're trying to indicate. A lot of the roles or job descriptions that we do have, depending on the state, it will show a salary range for that particular role. So sometimes that information is right up front and you can kind of gauge from there, and then the recruiter will ask you maybe what your interests are, depending on the role as well. And then you would have your interview, and then further salary discussions can happen after the interview concludes, once you're further engaged with your recruiter on the offer process. So just not during the interview, but there are numerous times kind of before and after that you'll be able to connect with your recruiter and learn a bit more about the range.
All right. Well, that was the last question. We've got about 10 minutes left. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dewey.
Dr. Harper, thank you so much. Masterful job facilitating the Q&A. And David, Tierra, really, really good information. As we go to our reminders with things, I do want to give David, you Tierra, and even you, Dr. Harper, as well, an opportunity to maybe share a closing thought. I heard so many things that were touched on. But David, maybe we start with you. We'll let you hand it down the line. What's something that folks need to take away as an action item here as they're getting prepared for those next interviews that may be coming up next week, next month, or next year? Talk to them, sir.
Thank you, Dewey. Really just thank you all so much. Great engagement. Love the questions. Very thought-provoking as we like. And if I can give any lasting piece of advice, practice. Know your story, come from the heart, and really be prepared for that interview, especially when we're giving you the tools to know what to anticipate. Just come ready to knock it out, and I'm sure you'll do well. Tierra?
Yeah, thanks, David. So yeah, I would definitely echo David's sentiments and also say thank you so much for having us. We really love being here. But yeah, as far if I had 3 words, I would say, of course, research, practice, and breathe. Don't forget to breathe, whether it's right before the interview starts. Just take a few deep breaths. It's okay. Understand that you are in demand. We are looking for you. You were chosen for a reason, and just be confident in knowing that.
Well, mine is really easy, and I think if I had to do 3 words, it's failure is growth. I think you all talked very early on about sometimes, and we will fail. You will fail. We all have, and we will. But to own that and actually talk about how you grew from that is really powerful. It shows people that you're thinking about what you can do better. It shows that you really are strategic about how you can learn and apply what you've learned into different spaces. So I always say failure is growth. So it is not the end. It is a comma, not a period. So that is definitely the one thing that I definitely always tell students to remember.
We love it. We love it. Dr. Harper, Tiara, David, great information there. We had one more follow-up that came in. David, you mentioned the 5 and 40 rule. Give us again one more time what that rule is, just as a rule of thumb for scholars.
We post it at minimum internally 5 days or 40 applicants, or whichever comes first. So that's typically the rule that we go by.
That's either side. So again, it could be 5 days, or it could be that 40 applicants, and then it could come down. Thus the reason to maybe have your paperwork really ready to go. Outstanding. All right. Well, listen, team, as we're closing out things here, we mentioned earlier the importance of feedback. We want to know your thoughts about the information that was shared today. Take a couple of moments, scan this QR code. It'll jump right out to our quick survey. Won't take you more than 2 minutes to complete it, but give us feedback because we want to continue to improve on the content that we're delivering, and your feedback is most certainly appreciated. So please take a minute and submit that for us. Hey, as we jump forward, as we start to kind of wind things down here, just a quick reminder, Beyond College is up and running. This is installment number 4 of the year. So we've got 4 completed in a couple of minutes and then 8 more to go, with a lot of great content that will be coming up. So please use that QR code, share that information with any and everyone that you think may benefit from the webinar series. We'd love to get more and more folks connected in. And again, anyone who's listening to playback, thank you so much for tuning in, and please continue to join us for additional episodes. All right, we're getting down to the final items here. We talked a little bit earlier about the work that's happening around our HBCUs, 107 HBCUs across the US. And we're really excited that now a growing number of those schools are actually aligning with Wells Fargo through our HBCU Legends program. So I would encourage everyone, scan the QR code here. It'll take you over to our landing page to share more about this amazing program. And for those that bank with Wells Fargo, you have the ability to customize your banking experience for your debit card, specifically for your debit card products, and actually celebrate the HBCU of your choice. So we're pretty excited about this program and excited about adding more and more schools to this amazing HBCU Legends program in the days ahead. Last but not least, some quick reminders, team. Really great resources that David and Tiara and the team have available. The wellsfargojobs.com website, the talent community, getting connected in there to stay abreast of all of the opportunities that are out and available, and also to share some of your areas of interest with individuals they're actually doing recruiting across our firm. So go ahead and get connected to that talent community. We've talked already about Beyond College. We'd just love to have you participating in more of these sessions throughout the course of the year. And I do want to acknowledge the great work that our buddy Sean Passmore and the team are doing around military recruitment efforts. So for anyone that's on the lines that served in the military, is currently serving, thank you so much for your service. Please make sure you get connected in with Sean and his team to learn more about opportunities specifically for those who served in the military via that military recruiting at wellsfargo.com email address. All right. Sand has run out of the hourglass here for today. I want to thank again our panelists for the great information they shared. Tiara, David, 5 gold stars for you all. Dr. Harper, you keep outdoing yourself every time with the Q&A and with the great things that you're doing. So thank you so much. And to the entire Jackie Robinson Foundation team, just very appreciative of your partnership here for this year. Want to shout out Barbara Scotland, want to shout out Angel Heyman and our other partners who helped to make these events such a great success. And we want to remind everyone to join us again, April the 20th, for a very important discussion around success strategies for managing student debt. Our buddy Casey Galindo, Sylvia Jones, and other partners will be coming on. So you all can jump out and research them a little bit on LinkedIn in advance, but they always bring a lot of really great content for the discussion around student debt and being able to address those things as quickly as you can. My closing thought will be, again, just to thank everyone for being on today. Thanks so much for just supporting this series. A lot of you are coming off of spring break. Some of you have just come back or heading into spring break. So I want you to enjoy that time, but let's also stay laser focused on the things that we need to get accomplished between now and the end of the semester. By the time we get to next month's session, then we'll be just a couple of weeks from graduation for some of you. We're heading off to internships maybe 6 or 8 weeks later. So let's stay focused. Let's continue to get things done. And if the Wells Fargo team can be of any assistance to you, please do not hesitate to contact us. Enjoy March Madness. I know we have scholars on. Some of your teams are still in the tournament. As I've been chatting with some of you all, others are not in the tournament anymore. So you get to pick who else you want to jump on the bandwagon with. Everybody stay safe, continued success. We'll see you next month. Good night, everybody.